Hello, friends. The story I am about to tell you is one that shows that love is all-encompassing. It exists to make us smile and cry. It exists to make us feel secure in our insecurities. It is a story that shows standing the test of love because it can be nothing else to be dumped on your wedding day, just to repeat the vows with the same person a few years later. Paul and Celine share a love story that is nothing like love at first sight. Paul and Celine were in their mid-20s when they met. They were neighbors. They started out pretty much as friends who just said hello to each other while going to their workplace. Their friendship then blossomed into a stage where both of them were looking out for each other, and soon they started sharing moments with each other. Their friendship was whole because they shared also little acts of kindness, like being complimented by an old person sitting next to them on the train for the little things, like simply smelling nice. Paul and Celine's friendship was a beautiful one, and soon it bloomed into a relationship. Their love was a classic example of friendship being the best foundation for a love that is expected to withstand the test of time, as their relationship lasted for 5 years. Paul and Celine soon started planning their wedding. They were both happy that they were finally going to be saying their vows. However, Celine didn't show up at her wedding. She had dumped Paul. Paul couldn't believe Celine had dumped him because he was sure they both wanted the marriage. They had planned to have 2 beautiful kids. They had vowed to never leave each other, as their love was one that came from 2 people who were a match made in heaven, destined to last forever. Their forever being as long as they lived. Paul and Celine had weaved dreams together, dreams that could only be fulfilled if they both were available to achieve them. Paul tried locating Celine, but his efforts were fruitless. She had even moved out of their apartment. Paul became heartbroken and couldn't even move on from the pain he suffered and get into a new relationship because he couldn't forget Celine. He was in utter disbelief. Celine was everything to him, and more. Paul soon became depressed because his whole life revolved around Celine. They were friends who talked to each other every day. They watched movies together. They ate together and shared beautiful moments, so it was natural to remember her every time he carried out all they had done together. 3 years later, Paul was finally moving past the heartbreak, and he now occasionally remembered Celine. He already made up his mind that marriage wasn't going to be happening, but his life took a new turn when his phone rang on a fateful day. He picked up and waited on the caller to speak, but all he got back was silence. He was about to drop the call when he heard his name in an all-too-familiar voice. He didn't need to be told who it was. He was sure the person calling was Celine. He had a rush of emotions he couldn't describe. His heart couldn't stop pounding, and anger coursed through him. Palpitations, premature ventricular contractions, and smells of perspiration kept haunting him. His brain kept on chanting, Celine was calling. Celine was calling after 3 years. Celine was calling after dumping him on their wedding day. Celine was calling. He remained disorganized for seconds, and before he could get back in the right frame of mind, Celine had dropped the call. Paul was left confused, but he tried the number back, but it got straight to voicemail. He couldn't drop a message because he wasn't sure of what was going to be a suitable thing to say to Celine after 3 years. He concluded she was going to call back, but that day passed, and Celine didn't call back. A day turned to a week, and nothing came from her. He started wondering if it was his imagination that played a trick on him. Maybe Celine hadn't called, but the call history on his phone was there to let him know someone truly called. He moved on, but his mind never left the phone call that had come from Celine and the possible reason for the call after she had gone silent on him for 3 years. On a fateful night, Paul's doorbell rang, and he wondered who could be at his doorstep. He tried to think if he had made any order that needed to be delivered, but he knew he had made no order in the past 3 years. He moved to his door, checked the door hole, and his breath was almost knocked out of him. He opened the door, and she was right there, beautiful as ever. She was there staring at him. Celine was at Paul's doorstep. They both stood there staring at each other. None of them could move, and Paul was stunned to silence. The woman in front of him is the reason he had dealt with heartbreak for 3 years. She's the reason he had almost given up on love. She was the woman who had dumped him on their wedding day, a wedding they had both planned. Paul couldn't stop the rush of words and emotions he was witnessing, and soon, Celine walked into his arms, hugged him, and left Paul in an even more shocking state. That same night, Paul received a text from Celine where she apologized for what she did 3 years ago. Paul replied telling her he needed both of them to sit to talk because he had just one question for her. Celine promised to visit Paul the next day. The next day, Celine showed up at Paul's. They tried to make small talk, but it didn't come naturally. Finally, Paul asked her why she left him 3 years ago. Celine burst into tears, and all she kept on uttering were apologies. Paul consoled her, and when she was stable, she told him she got unsure about what she had to offer in their marriage. It turned out Celine couldn't conceive as she suffered from a medical condition called primary ovarian insufficiency, and she knew how much she and Paul wanted kids as they planned their lives around those kids. She wasn't sure Paul would be willing to overlook that inability of hers, and she feared he was going to leave her for dead. Paul also realized Celine came back because she couldn't stop feeling guilty about what she did 3 years ago, and because her life had never been the same too, as her whole world revolved around Paul too. She sought for Paul's forgiveness, and they shared how miserable those 3 years had been for them. They finally decided to become friends again, and the healing cycle commenced. Paul and Celine were fast in getting back to the good old times, talking daily, sharing takes on how their day went without leaving out the big and little pieces. Happiness soon came back to their lives. Paul forgave Celine, but Celine never thought they both were going to get married again because she wasn't sure Paul still loved her after what she did, but her uncertainty was clear the day Paul proposed to her again. They both were happy. After all their dreams were about to be fulfilled because all they needed was to be there for each other. They decided they were going to adopt children and shower them with all the whole love in the world. They both got married that same year, and they vowed to love each other through thick and thin, to cherish themselves forever and to overcome all obstacles together, because theirs was a love story that was to last forever. This is a story of love and forgiveness. Love could hurt on some days, but love is also allowing someone to prove their love again, especially when you have realized that the best memories were made with them and more awesome memories could be made. Friends, would you have forgiven Celine? Would you have gotten married to her after she dumped you on your wedding day? Would you have avenged by dumping her on the wedding day? Share with us your comments, and do not forget to like this video and share.